The jazz guitarist challenged him. No string bending. Jimi smiled, picked up his guitar, and no one in that room was ever the same again. The room was small. 12 people, maybe 15. A rehearsal space above a record shop in Greenwich Village, January 1968. The kind of place where musicians gathered after midnight when the official gigs ended and the real playing began. Cigarette smoke hung in the air. Someone's girlfriend sat cross-legged by the window. An upright bass leaned against the wall. 2 amplifiers, their pilot lights glowing in the dim room. Folding chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. Jimi Hendrix sat on a wooden stool near the back, his Stratocaster resting across his lap. He wasn't supposed to be there. He just finished a show at the Fillmore East, had been walking past when he heard music drifting up from the second-floor window. He'd climbed the stairs. No one had invited him. No one needed to. When Jimi Hendrix walked into a room with musicians, the temperature changed. Not because he demanded it. Because everyone suddenly remembered they were still learning. For the first hour, Jimi just listened. A pianist worked through a modal progression. A saxophonist traded phrases with a drummer. The music was good, sophisticated, complex, the kind of playing that required years of study to even understand, much less execute. The jazz guitarist's name was Raymond Pierce. 42 years old. Juilliard-trained. Session work for Blue Note Records. He played with Coltrane once, years ago, in a club in Philadelphia. He wore that experience like a badge, mentioned it often enough that everyone knew without him having to say it directly. Raymond had watched Jimi walk in. Had watched him sit quietly in the back. Had watched younger musicians glance at Jimi between their own phrases, seeking approval, wanting acknowledgement. Raymond didn't like it. This was a jazz room. A serious room. And here was this rock guitarist, this showman with his wild hair and his Stratocaster and his stage tricks, sitting silent like he belonged here. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Around 1:30 in the morning, during a break between songs, Raymond spoke. His voice was casual, but everyone in the room heard the edge beneath it. "You know what I respect about real guitar playing?" Raymond said, not looking at Jimi but making sure everyone knew who he was talking to. Purity. No gimmicks. No bending strings until they scream. Just the notes. Clean. Precise. The way they were meant to be played. The room went quiet. The saxophonist lowered his horn. The pianist's hands stilled on the keys. Jimi looked up. His face showed nothing. No anger. No defensiveness. He just waited. String bending. Raymond continued, warming to his theme now, is a crutch. It's what rock players do when they don't have the technique for straight playing. You can hide a lot of mediocrity behind distortion and vibrato. Someone near the window shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone recognized the shape of a challenge, even when it was dressed in philosophy. Jimi still said nothing. He looked down at his guitar, his fingers moving almost unconsciously across the strings, not playing, just touching them lightly. Feeling them. "I don't know," Jimi said finally, his voice so quiet the room had to lean in to hear it. "Never really thought about it that way." Raymond smiled. "That's because rock doesn't require thought. It requires volume." The insult hung in the air like the cigarette smoke. Clear. Unmistakable. Jimi nodded slowly. "You might be right." He paused. "You want me to play something? Can you?" Raymond asked. "Without the bending? Without the tricks?" "I can try." Raymond gestured to the center of the circle. "Please. Show us." Jimi stood up. He didn't rush. He moved with that slow, deliberate grace that made every action look like it was happening underwater. He stepped into the center of the room, his guitar hanging from its strap, and sat down on the floor. Cross-legged. Like a child. He adjusted the guitar across his lap. Checked the tuning with a few soft plucks that no one else could quite hear. Then he looked up at Raymond. "No bending?" Jimi asked. No bending, Raymond confirmed. What do you want to hear? Surprise me. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Jimi closed his eyes. His left hand moved to the fretboard. Not the usual position, higher up, in a range most rock guitarists avoided because it required more precision, more control. His right hand hovered over the strings. And then he played a single note. Clean. Pure. Exactly as Raymond had described. No vibrato. No bending. Just the note itself, allowed to exist in its simplest form. The note hung in the air. Jimi let it decay completely to silence before playing the next one. Another single note. Different position. Same purity. Then another. What he was playing wasn't a melody, exactly. It wasn't a progression. It was something else. Each note existed independently, but together they created an architecture of sound that made the silence between them as important as the notes themselves. No one in the room moved. Jimmy's face was completely still. Eyes closed. No expression. He looked like he was listening to something only he could hear and simply translating it into these singular, perfect notes. The fourth note held longer than the others. When it finally faded, Jimi opened his eyes and looked directly at Raymond. That work? He asked quietly. Raymond didn't answer. His face had gone pale. His own guitar sat forgotten across his lap. Because what Jimi had just done was impossible. Without string bending. Without any of the techniques Raymond had dismissed as crutches, Jimi had created something that made everyone in the room forget how to breathe. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. Jimi stood up slowly. He walked over to Raymond, still holding his guitar. He crouched down beside the older musician until they were at eye level. Play something for me, Jimi said. Show me how it's supposed to be done. It wasn't sarcasm. His voice carried no edge, no triumph. He genuinely wanted to hear Raymond play. Raymond's hands were shaking. I don't. Come on, man, Jimi said gently. I want to learn. Show me what pure technique looks like. Raymond lifted his guitar. His fingers found the strings. He started to play, a jazz standard, executed with textbook precision. Every note where it should be. Every phrase grammatically correct. It was perfect. And it was completely empty. After 8 bars, Raymond stopped. He couldn't continue. Because in the wake of what Jimi had just played, Raymond's perfection sounded like exactly what it was. Notes on a page, executed without flaw but also without truth. The room understood. The saxophonist understood. The pianist understood. Even Raymond's girlfriend by the window understood. Jimi had done something that would be talked about for years afterward, in this room and others like it. He hadn't crushed Raymond. Hadn't humiliated him. Hadn't proven him wrong through volume or virtuosity, or any of the tools people expected from the greatest guitarist alive. He'd done something worse. He'd played 4 notes, just 4, and made everyone in the room realize that technique without soul was just practiced emptiness. That rules without understanding were just walls. That Raymond had spent 20 years building a prison of correctness and calling it mastery. Jimi stood up. He walked back to his stool in the corner and sat down, his guitar across his lap again. Thank you for letting me play, he said to the room. To everyone. I learned something. No one knew what to say. The session had ended, though no one had officially called it. People started packing up their instruments, with unusual quietness. The usual post-playing chatter didn't materialize. Everyone moved like they were in a library, or a church, or some other space where loud voices would violate something sacred. Raymond sat motionless in his chair, his guitar still across his lap, staring at nothing. Jimi was the last to leave. As he reached the door, guitar case in hand, he paused and looked back at Raymond. Hey, Jimi said softly. Raymond looked up. Those 4 notes? Jimi said. I can show you how I heard them. If you want, Not tonight. But sometime. If you want to know. He wasn't offering to teach. The word teach was too small for what he meant. He was offering to share the space where those notes lived. To show Raymond the room behind the room. Raymond nodded, unable to speak. Jimi left. The door clicked shut behind him. The stairs creaked as he descended. Raymond sat alone in the empty rehearsal space. His girlfriend had left. Everyone had left. The amplifiers hummed their pilot light hum. Cigarette smoke still hung in the air. He looked down at his guitar. At his hands. At the fingerboard he knew better than his own face. And for the first time in 20 years, Raymond Pierce didn't know how to play. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. The story spread the way these stories always spread. The saxophonist told another musician. The pianist told students. Within a week, a dozen versions of The Night Hendrix Played Four Notes were circulating through New York's music scene. Most of the retellings got it wrong. People added drama that wasn't there. Made Raymond into a villain. Made Jimi into a hero. Added dialogue that never happened. Turned it into a confrontation, a victory, a lesson taught to an arrogant jazz snob. But the 12 people who were actually in that room knew better. They knew it wasn't about winning. It was about the moment when perfect technique met absolute truth and realized it had been living in a smaller house than it needed to. Raymond Pierce never mentioned Coltrane again. He kept playing, session work, club dates, teaching, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd spend hours alone with his guitar, trying to find the space Jimi had showed him existed. Some nights he'd get close. Most nights he wouldn't. But he kept looking. 3 years later, Jimi Hendrix died on September 18, 1970. Raymond was playing a club date in Soho when he heard. He finished his set, packed his guitar, went home, and didn't play for 6 months. When he finally picked up the instrument again, the first thing he played was 4 notes. Single notes. Pure. Clean. No bending. He played them over and over, trying to understand. Trying to hear what Jimi had heard. Trying to access that room behind the room. He never quite found it. But he spent the rest of his life looking. And that search made him a better musician than 20 years of perfect technique ever had. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The rehearsal room above the record shop in Greenwich Village closed in 1974. The building was torn down in 1981. A coffee shop stands there now. The people who drink their lattes have no idea that in a room that no longer exists, a man once played 4 notes that changed everyone who heard them. There's no recording of that night. No bootleg. No video. Just the memory carried by the people who were there, and the stories they told. But in certain circles, among certain musicians, if you mention no bending and 4 notes, people know exactly what you're talking about. They know about the night Jimi Hendrix proved that mastery isn't about what you can do. It's about what you understand. And what you're willing to share. Raymond Pierce died in 2003. In his apartment, his daughter found notebooks filled with musical notation. Page after page of single notes, arranged in different sequences. 4 at a time. Always 4. At the bottom of the last page, in Raymond's handwriting, were 3 words. Still listening. Still learning. Raymond Pierce died in 2003. In his apartment, his daughter found notebooks filled with musical notation. Page after page of single notes, arranged in different sequences. 4 at a time. Always 4. At the bottom of the last page, in Raymond's handwriting, were 3 words. Still listening. Still learning. His daughter didn't understand what the notebooks meant. She asked her father's old musician friends. One of them, the saxophonist who'd been in that room in 1968, sat down with her and told her the story. About the challenge. About the 4 notes. About the night her father's understanding of music broke open and never closed again. Your father was already a great musician when he met Hendrix, the saxophonist said. But that night, he became a real one. There's a difference. She asked what happened to the other people in the room that night. The pianist had moved to Europe, still playing, still searching for that same space Jimi had revealed. The bassist had become a teacher, and every student who studied with him heard the story of the four notes at least once. The girlfriend by the window had married someone else, but she still remembered the silence that followed Jimi's playing, said it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. We were all witnesses, the saxophonist said. And witnesses carry responsibility. We have to remember it right. Not the mythology. The truth. The truth was simpler and more profound than any legend could capture. A man played four notes in a small room. And everyone who heard them had to rebuild their understanding of what music could be. That's the weight of real mastery. Not what it proves. What it opens. Not what it takes away. What it gives. The Stratocaster Jimi played that night was sold at auction in 1995. The person who bought it tried to play those four notes. Spent years trying. Never quite got there. Eventually accepted that the notes weren't in the guitar. They were in the understanding. The room is gone. The people are mostly gone. But the four notes remain, carried forward by the stories, waiting for the next person ready to hear what they really mean.